Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Material Matters, hosted by me, Grant Gibson. In each podcast, we'll be meeting a maker, designer, artist or architect who is intrinsically linked to a particular material or technique, discovering how their crafts shape their lives and careers. In this latest episode, it's wonderful to be joined by the textile artist Celia Pym. Now, I think it's safe to say that Celia has turned darning and small acts of repair into an art form, taking clothes that otherwise might be thrown away and giving them a new meaning. Her pieces are often centred around grief, loss, and tiny but symbolic acts of care. The artist has been shortlisted for the prestigious 2017 Loewe Craft Prize and the 2017 Women's Hour Craft Prize. Celia, thanks very much for inviting us into your studio.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. I mean, it's intriguing to be here. Can we talk a little bit about where you work and how you work? I mean, I'm intrigued particularly by Phyllis Barlow on the wall there. What is it about Phyllis's work that you enjoy?
I was actually reading about Phyllis's work yesterday, the Folly catalogue from the Venice Biennale last year. I love the readiness of her work and the sort of sense of the ambiguity and the sense of things maybe falling apart a little, and yet they're super robust at the same time. That's always what I see in them. But the reason I've got that portrait on the wall of her is because she's in her studio clothes, and I had the picture above of Agnes Martin before I had the picture of Phyllis Barlow, and you can see they're both wearing blue jeans and a sort of blue top. And I love this idea that women in their studios wear blue jeans and blue tops and get messy. I don't know, they're both, like
and there you are.
And that wasn't on purpose, but I mean, I've loved Agnes Martin's work for a long time as well. And so it's an accidental, that wall is just a slow accumulation of female artists sort of in their studio that I like.
Can we discuss your background?
Yeah.
I mean, how important were your family in getting you into textiles, I wonder?
My family are all, I would say, more or less makers in some way or other. Certainly my immediate family. I grew up in a household with my parents and my siblings and my great aunt and great uncle, my grandparents, and next door was an aunt and uncle. So
really? Wow.
Yeah, so there were 9 of us in one house, and then an aunt and uncle next door, and some cousins up the road.
And where was this?
This was in Kent.
Right.
Well, actually, initially in North London, and then in Kent. And they all, our house had things which I assumed everyone had, but I've come to learn it's not true. String drawers, endless toolkits for fixing things, stuff that didn't work was available to figure out how to make it work again. My great uncle was a painter, and he lived in the house and his studio was in the house. So he was painting, you saw his daily work happening. My great aunt was an amazing gardener. There was a big garden that they looked after. They knew about the natural world, but they also knew about making, and certainly they all could more or less knit. My mum's a good knitter, though she's very modest about it and says she's not. So it wasn't that they particularly encouraged me to do textiles. It was just part of the background of my life, I think, as a child, this making and doing and playing with materials.
Do you remember the first time you picked up textiles and started making?
I vaguely remember my mum making me a green mohair sweater when I was quite young. It was a cardigan, and I think I was quite interested in this wool. I'm not sure if I knit on it or not, or if I just was really into that wool. And then I studied textiles when I was about 11 or 10 or something. I had a class at school, and it's funny, I really remember clearly the satisfaction of it. I made a little cross-stitch picture of a fox at night, and that really hit. I mean, that's still a sensation I chase, that feeling of total completion on a piece of work. So I think that was early engagement with textiles. I knit. I mean, people try to teach me to knit. I'm sort of a fickle learner, in that someone tells me something's a good idea to learn, and then I'm not convinced until I've decided it's a good idea to learn it. So even the most reliable individual says, "Oh, you'll love this," and I'm like, until I discover it for myself, I'm like, no, I'm not sure I will love this. So I know that I was taught to knit when I was little, but I didn't really pick it up again until I was 20, I think.
Because you've had this kind of extraordinary, fascinating, genuinely eclectic career.
Yeah.
And initially studying sculpture at Harvard.
Yeah.
What made you decide to do that, and what did you learn there?
Well, first of all, the first story about that was that I decided to go to the States anyway. I grew up in the UK,
right.
my mum's American. My grandparents lived in Boston, where Harvard is, and I really was excited about the US. I really wanted to go there. So I went. And then, I mean, the funny thing about Harvard was that it's such an academic institution, and the art department's tiny. In my graduating class, I think there were maybe 5 other students in studio, like me. So that's a class of 1,800, 5 people are doing studio arts. There were a lot more filmmaking students.
What were you kind of making?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to tell you this. I was working with really heavy materials. I loved sculpture because you don't start with your. I took an intro to sculpture class and I adored it. I adored making plaster. I liked concrete. I liked welding. I liked big things. I liked things that were bigger than my body, and the sculpture department seems to do that. And 3D, and it was material as well. Painting didn't take for me at all.
Why not?
It was too flat. It was really, really... I also didn't get it. I just didn't... the tool of the brush didn't make sense to me. And it was quite an experimental painting course that I remember doing. I did a couple painting courses, but it really wasn't... I liked having my hands literally in a bucket of material, and that felt really good to me. So and plaster fascinated me, something that could set. So I was doing quite improvisational sort of work, building things in an hour, or making stuff that took the time of the material to set, or that I had the physical strength to build, or twice my height. So a lot of it was, I was interested in Bruce Nauman, and I was kind of interested in Eva Hess, and I didn't know about Philida Barlow then, but I was really interested in making something that mirrored me somehow. I think that's what I liked about sculpture, and that was a big scale.
So scale.
Yeah, scale was always a big conversation in the sculpture department. It seemed like that was... And actually, when I applied to Royal College for my master's later, I'd been thinking about applying to sculpture there, and I went to see the sculpture department, and the only bit of feedback I got, this wasn't an interview, just to go see them, they said, I showed them my portfolio, they said, your work's too small for sculpture. And I thought, well, if you're not interested in me, then I'm not interested in you. I mean, it wasn't entirely like that, but I was struck by that.
I mean, you left Harvard, and obviously you ended up at the Royal College eventually, but in between, you taught, right?
Yeah.
What did you teach?
Art and design at secondary school.
In the UK?
Yeah, in the UK. I had a friend who told me that life was going to be hard as an artist. She was a social worker. Actually, she wasn't at the time, but she is now. And a good school friend, and she was like, Celia, this is crazy, you're never going to make a living, you should become a teacher. And I don't know why I listened to her, but I'm glad I did. I did a PGCE in art and design, and I love teaching. I knew I liked teaching. I like communicating, and teaching just looks like, it's very hard work, but it also looks like play to me, because you have this opportunity to engage with an idea or a material or a thing. And I'd loved school as well. So it's really funny. I've come to recognise, as I've taught, how different children's experiences of school can be, and how just their attitude will inform how they approach learning. But for me, when I was 23 and started teacher training, I felt very positive about school, secondary school in particular, being a teenager. And
were you academic as a school child yourself?
Both,
I wonder?
yeah. Yeah, I was. I loved maths. I liked, I was very academic actually, but I also really liked the arts. And what was nice about my family, if you're asking again, is they never saw a problem with that. There was never, and they were very open. I don't know why, but shape yourself in whatever way you want was sort of their attitude. I was never, it's really funny now, I was never asked, what are you going to be? That was never a question when I was a kid, whereas I feel like all education is now asking students that, and it makes me really sad, because I don't think it's a very helpful question. Because I don't think I think if you know what you like and what you love, that will help you figure it out. Maybe I'm being romantic, but... So
then you ended up at the Royal College?
I ended up at the Royal College.
Why did you stop teaching?
I don't know if you saw that show, but I did a show with Freddie Robbins she chose me for a show called Knit Two Together in 2004 or 5, I think. When I finished at Harvard, before I started teaching, I got a fellowship to knit a journey around Japan. So I'd started knitting right at the end of my sculpture degree. And I don't know if I've spoken to you about this before, but I really was struggling in the studio, so I was using knitting as a way to warm up, because I remembered that I could knit, and I was thinking, oh, what sort of time-based, slow activity would encourage me to get into the studio? Actually,
to warm up mentally, rather than
warm
physically.
up mentally and physically.
Right.
But it was actually like an inducement. Like if you've got something to do when you get in the studio, I felt a bit calmer. So I started knitting just as this like warming up activity. And after 3 months of warming up, I realised I'd knit this huge pile of knitting, which I hadn't really been paying attention to. I mean, if I'm honest, I think that some of the best things I make are when I'm not precisely looking straight at them. And in the studio, I try and get at that a lot. But it's a really hard thing, because if you do it too actively, like I'm trying to make this byproduct, like I'm concentrating on one thing, but I'm actually in the corner of my eye trying to keep an eye on that other thing that's happening, I'm making, it's too self-conscious. Whereas if it genuinely just happens, it's like the back of embroidery or the back of work. I'm often very pleased with the back of work. Lots of textile artists talk about that. Yeah. I mean, it's a really common thing, but it's that sort of less self-conscious, more accidental mark. So I made this huge pile of knitting. I loved that it equaled the 3 months of time. I loved the length of it, the weight of it, the volume of it. And so I'd proposed to a fellowship that I would like to measure out a journey in a piece of knitting in Japan, a country I'd never been to before and didn't speak Japanese. And I'd been interested in the novels of Haruki Murakami, so I sort of had Japan really vividly in my head that year. And they said, yeah, all right, you can go. And the idea of this piece of work was that I would knit every day for 9 months, carrying wool and needles, and I would find wool in a place and knit it and then move on to the next place. And the speed of the journey would be determined by the speed of my knitting. And partly what I loved was that knitting needles are super portable. You know, you can just carry it as an art form. It's not so heavy, and that wool is available both in high-end stores and in local haberdashery or craft stores. That is this sort of universal material. Or not universal, but ubiquitous. You can find it. It's not that hard to find yarn. And when someone from the British Council, I think, must have seen me in Japan, because I was doing this live a lot of the time, outdoors, in public. I had a small show in Kyoto, and Freddie got wind of it. And when she was looking for work for that show, she somehow found me. I think because it was early days of emails, and I had a Hotmail account, and I did have a business card that I'd taken with me to Japan. So I presume she must have, I've never actually asked her, I presume she must have got that card. And she invited me to be in the show Knit Two Together. And it was the first show I'd ever been in that was located me in textiles. And I was really excited about it. But particularly I was excited about Freddie. I found her really straightforward and interesting. And I loved how ambitious she was for work, textile work. I loved her work. And she said, she was one, I was teaching full time, you know, in secondary school, and she said, hey, have you ever thought about coming to do a master's at the Royal College? And actually I hadn't. That wasn't a way I was thinking. I was really, I think I was 26, and I was earning a living teaching. I was holding on to it. I had a studio at Bow Arts Trust. But Freddie was super influential in encouraging me even to think about being in the textiles department, and that's why I applied for the RCA.
So that's interesting. You hadn't thought of being in that textile realm
not
before.
Really.
It was a bit of a kind of luck, really, in some regard.
I think it was a huge amount of luck, though. You know, you could see that I was heading that way in a bit, because I'd also been doing these thread pieces where I was like filling up space with thread. So I was like taking the height of my head and threading a line across a room so that it would create a ceiling that was just at my head height. I was doing lots of work with thread and yarn, so it wasn't completely out of the blue to do textiles, but I think I hadn't thought of being an expert or whatever that, you know, that I hadn't thought of being a specialist in textiles. I thought I was making sculpture, and I hadn't imagined that the material and textiles could be the thing that shaped the work.
So how did your work develop at the Royal College?
Initially, I was completely... I was really excited about how good everyone was at making things. And I knew I was good at making things, but I didn't really... And I knew a lot about textiles, actually, because I should say I did study weave as well when I was in secondary school. So, God, I should have said that straight from the beginning. I did have this experience with weaving between 16 and 18 when I'd been weaving. So I knew about weave structures, but I'd always sort of, like I said, people telling me something is worth learning, and then it takes me time. With weaving, and it's like I did it just about right. I would say that's true of lots of the ways I work. Anyway, at Royal College, the work developed, let me think. I had to do a lot of technical stuff to start with, which threw me, and I felt very confused, like digital embroidery, because I was on mixed media. And I really wasn't sure how I fit in initially, actually. And it's a problem I see still with a lot of students that we get, that the school can feel, you can be a bit overawed by the level of skill with other students, the knitters on Dubier machines, the weavers on the jacquard, and the sense of a hand skill and how it conveys its sophistication, or even, it's not even about skill, ideas. So if an idea leads and then the material follows, I remember feeling a bit like, oh, I'm not sure that's the right place. But Freddie continued to encourage me, and lots of the tutors did, and had a fantastic class. And in the beginning of my second year is when I started doing the mending work.
I was going to ask you about that.
I'm glad you introduced
that.
I'm trying to... So I didn't know how to answer your question about how the work developed. I mean, I can talk project through project, but mending came in sort of second year.
Well, let's talk about the kind of the catalyst for your current work, if you like, which is a jumper that belonged to your great uncle, I believe.
Yeah, the painter.
Let's talk about the jumper.
So, have you ever seen the jumper?
Yes, I've seen photographs.
So it's white and it's sort of big, like a big man's shape. It's hand knit, and he had died in 2000. Had he died? Yeah, he must have died. Sorry, I've suddenly... Lots of people have been dying recently, and when you get it all confused.
Yeah.
It suddenly shocked me, even just saying that out loud, how many years it's been. He had died. My dad, knowing that I like slightly lopsided, off, curious, maybe lumpy, damaged things. I'm not 100% sure what his instinct was, but I think it was because he thought that is kind of Celia's thing. When they were clearing up my uncle's rooms, they found this sweater, and it was heavily mended in the forearms. And he gave it to me. My dad gave it to me.
What had he been doing?
Well, that was the thing. So he was 96 when he died, and he would sit in his armchair the last sort of 4 or 5 years of his life with a board across the arms of the armchair, and he would just lean forward very heavily drawing. So my dad gives me this sweater. I'm in love with it for lots of reasons, but the two main ones were that I could see very distinctly in all that wear and tear the movements of his body, so the action of sitting, leaning forward and drawing. And I thought, that's a really interesting idea, that the garment holds something of a person. I mean, literally holds the body actions of a person. There's evidence in there. And then the other thing that really caught my attention was my aunt's mending, because it had been repaired. It was so ready. It was so like fast and just kind of, I don't know if has anyone mended your things in your life? Or do you mend
No,
things?
not really, no.
Okay.
I don't, much to my chagrin.
Okay, well, sometimes it's super immaculate and perfect, but what I know, it sits really level and flat with the surface of the cloth. It blends in really beautifully. Obviously, 100 years ago, children were being taught to do it invisibly. That was your goal. But my aunt's mending, what cracked me up was it was just like bits of yarn. It was all white, but they were different coloured whites. And then there's this funny little knitted patch that looks like a blister. And I could I loved that it was all small moments of repair. So it was just this constant attention to his sweater. But I also just loved how it was practical and unself-conscious, but kind as well. There was a sort of kindness to her. And I also, the thing that was really moving was that she'd died before him. And so there were all these new holes that hadn't been tended to. And I was suddenly, those things just catch you all of a sudden, where you think, oh, we didn't notice that was being neglected. Like you don't recognise what death will, what hole it will leave exactly. You think you might know, but you don't. And those little untended to holes really seemed like something to me. So that was the catalyst. That sweater, this idea of evidence, the body being visible in a garment, the slow wear of time as well, because these holes only appear gradually. And then that the broomstick and the broom handle, like the sleeves were almost entirely repair. And I was like, when was the moment it tipped from being original into repair? So
for the listeners who might not have seen the finished piece, what did you do?
So I added blue into it. It's got like these white patches, and then it's just got these extra bits of blue into it that spread up the sleeve.
I mean, I've seen you describe your repairs as unapologetic.
Oh yeah.
And what does that mean?
What do I mean by that? I guess if you think that I'm a terrible one for saying sorry in life, but in work I don't really say sorry. You know, I bump into people, it's an English habit. You bump into someone on a bus or get to open the door or whatever. I say sorry all the time. Before I've done something wrong, I will say sorry a lot of the time. And yet what I like in my work is I never feel that compulsion. I find what I love about creative life and studio life is it's totally free. I can do and be however I want to be in here. So the unapologetic nature of the darning, I think it's that the damage is there and there's no need to feel sorry about it. In fact, it's kind of a great thing, for me anyway. And repairing it is not, repairing it makes sense. So it's not a sorry, there's nothing regretful about it.
I mean, it seems to me that what your work has done is it started in this very personal way, but it's kind of broadened out. And I read a quote from you saying that, and I'll kind of paraphrase if you like, that investigating holes brings you into contact with people. And I'm wondering how does it do that?
Well, if you think about that Japan trip where I was outdoors knitting, I'm super interested in others. And I think a lot of the time I'm looking for ways to meet other people. So when I started darning, so I did my uncle's sweater, I mended it. I'm in my second year of my RCA, building up to, sort of trying to pull the work together. And I thought, well, if I'm interested in holes, I better see holes, like real holes. If I'm interested in damage, I should be looking for it. And I held this small exhibition where I invited members of the college to bring me things to wear. Bring me things to darn. And it was so funny because the first day, the gallery's empty with nothing there to repair. And then slowly people started bringing things. I was like, oh, this is great. I'm meeting all these people that I wouldn't otherwise meet. And also, we're talking. So they would show me, this was my first foray into it, they'd show me their tights or their elbow hole or whatever. And I'd find we were talking quite intimately and quite personally with that as complete strangers. It's a bit like going to see a doctor. You imagine them in a role. So like I'm the mender and I'm working as a professional mender, even though I feel deeply unprofessional, I did at the time, and people talk to you. So it's a lovely way it's an interesting invitation. Show me something that you own with a hole in it.
Yeah, because what does repair mean to people psychologically? What kind of stories were you hearing?
Well, I was hearing a lot about, it's changed, sort of. I think but early on, I heard tons of stories about grief, and I wasn't sure if that was to do with me or the way I was asking the question, or if the question just invites that. But I think it was like people heard repair and thought maybe there's something that needs looking after. There's something. And actually, I did a show much later called What Do I Need to Do to Make It Okay? And they framed a conference and they called it something like damage and repair. And I realised that actually it's the damage that interests me sometimes more than the repair. And I wondered if unconsciously I'd been communicating that early on. Instead of show me your hole, I was saying show me the damage. I like a sad story. Freddie teases me that the sadder the better.
Well, linking neatly, I think that you went from the Royal College, talking about damage, you went from the Royal College to trained as a nurse, which is fascinating. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I've been working for a few years. Do you know any nurses?
Well, my whole family are from. They're all.
Oh, they're in medicine, aren't
all
they?
of them. Yeah.
Okay, so you know that. I had worked as a nurse in my early 20s, care assistant actually, sort of to earn money and stuff, and I'd loved it. And then, I don't know if you can see the link, or if I've made it clear, but the body and the care was clearly developing as interest in this textile work. But I was also struggling to cut my way as an artist. It wasn't a lack of confidence exactly. I just wasn't sure about how I fit in the world or what the work was going to do. And I actually thought nursing would be a really solid job that would be an anchor, and then I'd have the studio at the same time. And I also felt strongly that nursing would teach me things about care that I was trying to get at. So yeah, I went and I did at King's College London, and I worked at St Mary's for 2 years more or less. St Mary's Hospital, crazy hospital.
I mean, something that was it still in the back of your head that you wanted to be an artist?
Definitely. And I think weirdly although it's quite a struggle, doing the nursing training was this odd flip-sided confirmation that I was more of an artist than a nurse. Although I loved nursing, I don't think I was bad at it. I was certainly safe and I was able to look after people. But as I was doing it, more and more I started to feel like, this isn't right. You should be being an artist. What are you doing? And I left rather dramatically. I just one day said, I can't do this anymore. This is wrong. I'm leading the wrong life. I should be being an artist. The only person... No, actually, my family were pretty supportive. They were a bit confused. Friends were confused. And then some friends were really relieved. They said, oh, thank God, it was really important that you were an artist. I was so worried that you were going into nursing.
I mean, nursing is a tough life. I mean, financially, being an artist is arguably sometimes probably harder.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to leave relative security to do something that isn't secure? And also,
you mean the security of nursing and a paycheck?
In terms of paycheck.
Yeah. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. And weirdly, I think it was really good, really, really good, because it meant I had to give more to work. You know, the fear of it was like, well, you have to make this work. I mean, teaching still sustains me financially, of course, but also from a work perspective, I love teaching. And I returned to making with a different commitment, I think, after I finished nursing.
That's interesting. I mean, can I ask a bit about how important when you're doing what you're doing, were you thinking about a market, who's going to buy this, who's going to commission me?
I'm hopeless. I am beyond hopeless. No, I'm almost never thinking about a market. I feel like it's not that I'm a chancer, but I dwell in some middle ground of great confidence and deep insecurity, which many artists do, I think, where I'm excited to get shows. The work seems to be selling. People seem interested in the ideas.
When the work sells, it sells to private collectors or into museums? Or
Private collectors.
Right.
This year I had a commission with a museum. That was amazing to work with their archive. And actually archives are quite an appealing. This was the Nouveau Musée National de Monaco. So they commissioned me. We've been working together for about 3 years. And what I loved is they'd heard about me. They'd seen a piece of work in a show and they invited me over really speculatively because they had a problem with the damaged costumes in their collection. And they just didn't know what to do about it. So the first invitation was, what do you think? What's your response to this collection? And then it built. We did one project together, and then this year they commissioned this flying gold cape project, which was amazing, where I mended one of their costumes, and they were totally free with letting me take it out for people to wear, because I was thinking again about meeting people. There are things that dwell in archives that are never going to get an outing, that are just going to sit in an archive, and in fact they'll just disintegrate more. They'll never even probably go on show because they're the poor example of what is already in the collection. And since I know that I can keep mending something, I said, look, if it gets damaged, I'll just mend it again. I'll just keep mending it. And I thought, so we took this cape on the road for people to wear and perform in. And it's a pretty magical object. And so it was really easy. It was just like the simplest thing in the world. You show up with a gold cape and some music and people dance and sing and wear it, whether they're children or adults with dementia or, you know. It was important to me that we did it with lots of different groups and,
I mean, the interesting about what you do, Celia, is it seems to me that it doesn't seem to matter what garment I've seen you work on natural jumpers, but also tracksuits and synthetics.
Yeah, I mean, the tracksuits I think confuse people because actually the tracksuits had holes cut in them, which are my way of. But I love the tracksuit because it doesn't unravel when you cut it, and I love the way it bumps up a little bit. But I also like the sort of unsportiness of a hole in a tracksuit. I mean, the tracksuits came about from sports socks, which came about from the Cultural Olympiad when I was employed to do some projects in Stratford for the Olympics. And my idea was that I was going to train an army of darners ready at the sidelines of the track to darn Jess Ennis Hill's shorts or whatever. I mean, it was sort of stupid and sort of serious at the same time. If we live in Stratford, how can we be useful to the Olympics beyond being cheerleaders? And so that was how I started on the sort of sports wear. But yeah, most materials I'm interested in. I realise I like wool a bit better, but cottons and silks I'm happy to look at and do. I think I like wool because I'm a bit heavier with wool. It can fit nicer in my hands. It's also quicker.
Our time is nearly up.
Yep.
So kind of final question really about kind of future aspirations. Where do you see your work going? Where can you take it?
Well, I've become obsessed with tapestry. I did some tapestry this summer and I mean, this is what's on the wall at the moment. And towels, old towel. I got this thing at the moment about old towels, used towels and old blankets and trying to integrate them with tapestry. I'm really keen to make some really big things, just physically big objects that grow and grow and grow and slightly take over the studio.
Well, that's a wonderful place to leave it. Celia Pym, thank you very much.
Thanks, Grant.